There is a weight in your spirit that nobody else can quite explain, a quiet knowing, a whisper that keeps tugging at your heart, even when everything around you says, let go. And I came to speak to the woman who has been wrestling in silence, the one who has cried behind closed doors, who has questioned her discernment, who has wondered if she's holding on too long or if she's about to walk away too soon. Because sometimes what feels like confusion is actually a divine interruption. And what looks like delay is God doing a deeper work than you can see. You've been strong for so long. You've carried burdens you never asked for, stood in the gap when others walked away, and loved when it would have been easier to shut your heart down. But now you're tired of hoping, tired of waiting, tired of pouring into something or someone that doesn't always pour back into you. And in that exhaustion, the enemy starts whispering, quit, walk away. It's not worth it. But I need you to pause right there, because not every voice that sounds like relief is sent to release you. Some voices are sent to distract you from destiny. What if I told you that your instinct to stay isn't weakness, but obedience? What if the very thing you've been tempted to abandon is the ground where God is about to show his power? See, we live in a culture that celebrates walking away the moment things get hard. But God doesn't always operate in convenience. He operates in purpose. And purpose will stretch you, challenge you, and sometimes even confuse you before it reveals itself fully. Now, hear me clearly. This is not about settling, and it's not about ignoring red flags. This is about spiritual discernment, because there's a difference between a situation that's draining you and a situation that's developing you. And only God can show you which is which. That's why you can't make this decision based on emotions alone. You need divine clarity, because what's on the other side of your obedience could be transformation. Not just for them, but for you. There is something powerful about a woman who refuses to give up when God has told her to stand. A woman who says, even when I don't understand it, I trust that God sees what I can't. Because sometimes God will place you in someone's life, not just to love them, but to cover them, to intercede for them, to stand in faith when they don't have the strength to stand for themselves. And that assignment, it won't always feel fair, but it will always be purposeful. So before you walk away, before you close that door, before you decide that you've done enough, take a moment to ask yourself, is this my breaking point or is this my building point? Because if God is warning you not to give up, then there's something bigger at stake than your frustration. There's a story being written that you can't fully see yet, and your obedience might just be the very thing that brings it to life. There comes a moment in every woman's journey where her strength feels stretched thin, where the weight she has been carrying begins to press against the very core of who she is. And in that moment, everything inside of her starts asking questions. Is this too much? Have I stayed too long? Am I losing myself trying to hold everything together? What makes this moment so dangerous is not just the exhaustion itself, but the confusion that comes with it. Because emotional exhaustion has a voice, so does divine assignment. And if you're not careful, you will mistake one for the other. Emotional exhaustion will make everything feel heavy. It will blur your vision and make even the things you once felt called to now feel like burdens you never signed up for. It creeps in slowly, not always announcing itself loudly, but settling into your spirit until you begin to feel drained without fully understanding why. You start to lose your joy, your peace feels interrupted, and the passion you once had begins to fade into routine. In that state, your natural instinct is to protect yourself, to pull back, to retreat, to say, I can't do this anymore. And sometimes that instinct is valid. Sometimes walking away is necessary for your healing. But then there is divine assignment, and it doesn't always feel easy either. In fact, many times it feels just as stretching, just as demanding, and just as uncomfortable. That's why it becomes so difficult to discern the difference. Because both emotional exhaustion and divine assignment can exist in the same space. Both can make you feel tired. Both can require sacrifice. And both can challenge your capacity. But here's the difference. One is depleting you without purpose, and the other is stretching you with purpose. A divine assignment will demand something from you, but it will also deposit something into you. Even when you're tired, there will be a quiet strength that keeps showing up. Even when you feel like giving up, there will be something deep within your spirit that refuses to let you walk away completely. It may not be loud, it may not be obvious, but it will be there. A sense that there is still more to this story, that God is still working, that this is not the end. Emotional exhaustion, on the other hand, will leave you feeling empty with no sense of renewal, no sense of direction. just a constant cycle of giving without replenishing. And this is where many women get it wrong, because they assume that if something feels hard, it must not be from God. But difficulty is not always a sign to leave. Sometimes it is a sign that something significant is happening beneath the surface, something that requires endurance, something that requires faith, something that is shaping you in ways you cannot yet fully understand. But at the same time, God is not calling you to completely lose yourself in the process. He is not asking you to stay in spaces that consistently break you without ever building you back up. So how do you discern the difference? You have to become honest with yourself in a way that goes beyond surface level emotions. You have to ask yourself, am I just tired or am I being torn down? Because tiredness can be restored, but being torn down is something entirely different. Tiredness comes from exertion, from giving, from pouring out, but it can be replenished through rest, through prayer, through moments of stillness. Being torn down, however, leaves you feeling diminished, questioning your worth, losing your sense of identity. Discernment also requires you to pay attention to what is happening within you, not just around you. Because sometimes the situation hasn't changed, but you have. Your capacity has shifted, your boundaries have weakened, and your ability to carry what once felt manageable now feels overwhelming. That doesn't always mean the assignment has ended. It may mean you need to approach it differently. It may mean you need to invite God into it in a deeper way, to seek wisdom on how to navigate it without losing yourself in the process. There is also a difference in the fruit that each produces. Emotional exhaustion will produce resentment if left unchecked. It will make you feel bitter, frustrated, and disconnected. You will begin to give, but with a heavy heart. You will begin to show up, but without love. And eventually, you will find yourself operating out of obligation rather than purpose. But a divine assignment, even when it is hard, will produce growth. It will challenge you, yes, but it will also refine you. It will reveal parts of you that you didn't know were there, strength you didn't know you had, patience you didn't know you could develop, faith you didn't know could stretch that far. And sometimes the confusion comes because you are experiencing both at the same time. You are tired, but you are also called. You are weary, but you are also assigned. And in that tension, you have to learn how to care for yourself without abandoning what God has placed in your hands. You have to learn that resting does not mean quitting, and setting boundaries does not mean failing. It means you are stewarding your strength so that you can continue to show up in the way God has called you to. There is a wisdom that comes when you stop making decisions based solely on how you feel in the moment and start seeking God for clarity. Because your feelings are real, but they are not always reliable indicators of what you should do next. They can be influenced by fatigue, by frustration, by unmet expectations. But God sees the full picture. He sees what you cannot see. He understands what you do not understand, and he knows whether what you are experiencing is something you need to release or something you need to remain in for a greater purpose. And so the question is not simply, am I tired? The question is, what is this producing in me? Is it drawing you closer to God, even in your struggle? Is it teaching you something, shaping you, refining you? Or is it consistently breaking you down, leaving you feeling less like yourself, less like the woman God created you to be? Because God's assignments may stretch you, but they will never strip you of your identity. They may challenge you, but they will not destroy you. When you begin to understand this, you stop reacting impulsively to discomfort and start responding intentionally with discernment. You give yourself permission to rest without guilt, to step back when necessary, to recalibrate your approach without completely abandoning the assignment. You stop viewing exhaustion as an automatic sign to quit and start seeing it as an invitation to check in with yourself and with God. And in that space of honesty, in that space of seeking, clarity begins to emerge, not always all at once, not always in a way that answers every question, but enough to guide your next step, enough to remind you that you are not alone in this, that God is present even in your weariness, that he is speaking even in your confusion, that he is guiding even when the path feels uncertain. Not every voice you hear in the quiet moments of your heart is sent from God. Some voices are meant to distract you, to confuse you, to lead you away from the path that God has set before you. The enemy is relentless in his attempts to masquerade as a voice of relief, a voice of wisdom, or even a voice of reason. He knows that when he can make you question your purpose, doubt your call, or second guess your discernment, he has the power to steal your destiny. And that is why spiritual discernment is so critical for the woman who is walking in God's assignment. For the woman who is standing at a crossroads where the choice to stay or to leave feels like it could define her life, the moment you feel the pull to walk away, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, where is this voice coming from? Because not every whisper in your spirit is from God. Some are echoes of past hurts, fears you've carried for years, or even pressures from the world that have no bearing on the assignment He has placed before you. The world tells you that if it is hard, you should quit. The enemy tells you that if it is uncomfortable, it is over. And the devil will even dress up fear, frustration, or impatience as wisdom, hoping that you will mistake it for divine guidance. But God's voice is never in a rush, never full of fear, never attempting to make you move ahead of His timing. You see, distraction can come in many forms. It may be an opportunity that looks good on the outside, but pulls you away from your calling. It may be a relationship that seems easier to walk into than the one you are already in. It may be an inner voice telling you that the effort is not worth it, that your investment will never return the fruit you desire. Distraction often feels urgent, and that urgency is designed to push you toward a decision that is misaligned with God's will. The problem is that when you are tired, when you are overwhelmed, when your emotions are high, these distractions feel convincing. They sound like logic. They feel like relief. They look like peace, but they are, in reality, strategies to steer you off course. This is why discernment is essential. You have to learn to differentiate between the voice of God, which always aligns with purpose, and the voices of fear, doubt, or the enemy, which seek to derail you. God's voice will remind you of your assignment, even when it is hard. It will give you a sense of clarity, even when confusion surrounds you. It will reassure you of His timing, even when patience feels impossible. Distractions, on the other hand, will always attempt to make you focus on the temporary, the easy, the immediate, rather than the eternal, the significant, and the purposeful. The woman who is called to remain steadfast is the one who can hear the difference. She has trained her spirit to recognize the gentle nudges of God, to identify the subtle warnings of the enemy, and to distinguish between legitimate counsel and noise. This doesn't happen overnight. It comes from consistent prayer, constant alignment with Scripture, and the discipline to pause before making decisions that could impact her life and those around her. It comes from the willingness to sit in discomfort while seeking divine insight, rather than rushing to action based on impulse or emotion. Sometimes the voice that tempts you to walk away is so convincing because it plays on your insecurities. It reminds you of your past failures, your past heartbreaks, or your perceived limitations. It may even bring up comparisons, what others have that you don't, what seems easier for someone else, what seems more successful, more rewarding, more effortless. And in those moments, it is easy to believe that giving up is the path to freedom, that letting go is the path to peace. But peace that comes from surrendering prematurely is not true peace. It is temporary relief that masks the loss of a God-given opportunity. Discernment also requires you to understand the difference between advice and authority. Friends, family, colleagues, even mentors can speak words that feel right, that sound reasonable, or that align with their perspective. But unless God has confirmed it to you in your spirit, their guidance is not authority over your life. It is simply input. And if you allow the enemy to manipulate your trust in others, you will begin to mistake human opinion for divine instruction. And the result is almost always a detour from destiny. You must also recognize that distractions often present themselves as solutions to exhaustion. They appear as a way to escape struggle, discomfort, or the tension of waiting. They promise immediate relief, but demand abandonment of the work God is doing. And while you may feel a temporary release from stepping away, what you sacrifice is far greater than the comfort you gain. Every assignment God places in your life has a purpose, a timing, and a result that cannot be replicated by shortcuts or avoidance. Walking away may feel liberating in the moment, but it will leave you empty if God is still calling you to remain. This is why prayer and spiritual reflection are so vital. You cannot rely solely on feelings or circumstances to determine your next step. You must seek God with your whole heart, laying bare your fears, your doubts, and your exhaustion. You must invite Him to illuminate what is true, to expose what is false, and to give you the discernment necessary to act in alignment with His will. Because when you are guided by His voice, rather than the compelling urgency of distraction, you are able to walk in confidence, knowing that your steps are ordered, your actions are purposeful, and your faith is being strengthened even in difficulty. Discernment is a muscle, and it strengthens through practice. It strengthens when you pause before reacting, when you refuse to make decisions out of fear, when you test every thought, every impression, every voice against the truth of God's word. It strengthens when you remember that not every moment of discomfort is a signal to quit. Some of it is a test, some of it is preparation, and some of it is the refining fire that develops endurance, resilience. Ultimately, learning to recognize God's voice over the distractions requires patience, faith, and attentiveness. It requires understanding that God is never in a hurry to make you make the wrong decision. He is never abrupt in his guidance, and he never coerces obedience through fear. His voice will always lead you toward growth, toward alignment with purpose, and toward the fulfillment of the assignment he has placed in your life. Any voice that pulls you away from that trajectory is not to be trusted, no matter how persuasive, no matter how tempting, and no matter how comforting it seems at first glance. And the woman who masters this discernment begins to live in a freedom that others cannot understand. She can sit in tension without panic. She can face uncertainty without abandoning faith. She can be wary and still remain aligned. She learns that the struggle is not always a signal to quit, and the discomfort is not always a warning to retreat. She discovers that true obedience is often quiet, patient, and steadfast, refusing to react impulsively to the seductive whispers of distraction. In this journey, you also come to understand that discernment protects more than your heart. It protects your destiny. Because every time you allow a false voice to dictate your actions, you are choosing convenience over calling. You are choosing temporary relief over eternal reward. And when God's timing intersects with your obedience, the results are far greater than anything you could orchestrate on your own. The breakthrough, the reconciliation, the transformation, the restoration. These things are reserved for those who can recognize his voice above all others, who can trust his guidance over the urgencies of distraction, and who will remain faithful even when leaving seems easier. Distractions will continue to appear. Doubt will continue to whisper. Fear will continue to push. But discernment gives you the power to pause, to listen, to weigh, and to act in alignment with God's perfect plan. It trains your heart to filter the noise, to hold on to truth, and to reject any instruction or temptation that seeks to lead you away from the assignment he has placed in your life. The more you practice this, the more confident you become in your ability to navigate life's challenges without compromising purpose, without succumbing to panic, without abandoning the work God is doing, and without losing yourself in the process. There is a power in a woman who refuses to give up on what God has placed in her life. It is a power that cannot be measured by physical strength, social status, or worldly influence. It is a spiritual power rooted in faith, obedience, and trust in God's timing. When God tells you not to quit, it is because he has a plan that requires your steadfastness, your commitment, and your unwavering belief that he is working behind the scenes even when you cannot see the outcome. Many women fail to understand the magnitude of remaining faithful in moments of uncertainty. They assume that perseverance is simply enduring hardship, but is much more than that. It is partnering with God's purpose in a way that transforms not only the situation before them, but also themselves. A woman who stays in obedience does so knowing that life will not always make sense, that circumstances may challenge her, that others may question her decisions, and that the world may try to convince her that she is foolish for continuing. Yet she persists because she knows that God's voice carries authority beyond human reasoning. She understands that his instructions are not bound by logic, convenience, or personal preference. God's directions often require faith, and faith sometimes looks like stepping into the unknown, leaning into discomfort, and trusting that the unseen hand of God is orchestrating the unfolding story. When she refuses to give up, she becomes a vessel of divine purpose, a living testament that obedience, even in difficulty, produces results that no human effort alone can achieve. Many women struggle with the temptation to give up because the challenges feel overwhelming. They have prayed, invested, loved, and waited only to face delays, misunderstandings, or apparent rejection. The natural reaction is to retreat, to protect themselves, to say, I've done enough, it's time to move on. And yet, this is often the very moment when God is preparing to move powerfully in ways that will exceed their expectations. The enemy will try to amplify fatigue, frustration, and doubt, presenting them as reasons to quit. But these feelings do not always reflect the reality of God's plan. Perseverance is not about denying feelings. It is about acknowledging them while choosing to act in faith, recognizing that your obedience can align you with the breakthrough that God has already promised. Faithful women also recognize that giving up prematurely not only forfeits potential blessings, but also interrupts their personal growth. Every trial, every season of waiting, every moment of endurance is a tool in God's hand to mold them into the person he intends them to be. It is in these moments of steadfastness that character is refined, patience is cultivated, and spiritual maturity is developed. The world often measures success by immediate results, but God measures success by obedience and alignment with his purpose. A woman who refuses to give up demonstrates that she values divine timing over immediate gratification, that she trusts God's wisdom over human understanding, and that she is willing to endure the process to experience the full measure of his plan. Moreover, refusing to give up has a ripple effect beyond the individual. A woman's obedience can inspire, encourage, and impact those around her in ways she may never realize. Her faithfulness can serve as a testimony to others who are struggling, a reminder that persistence in God's timing is never in vain. Her refusal to quit can strengthen relationships, restore hope, and even bring reconciliation where others have given up. God often uses the steadfastness of one person to catalyze transformation in an entire community or family. The decision to stay, to trust, and to persevere is never just for the woman herself. It is part of a greater plan that touches lives, changes hearts, and fulfills purposes that extend far beyond the immediate situation. It is important to understand that staying in obedience does not mean tolerating abuse, manipulation, or harm. God's instruction to remain steadfast is always aligned with righteousness and discernment. A faithful woman exercises wisdom, sets healthy boundaries, and seeks clarity through prayer, counseling, and scriptural guidance. Her refusal to give up is not blind perseverance, but informed obedience that is filtered through spiritual insight. She remains steadfast where God has called her while avoiding situations that are destructive or contrary to his will. This balance of courage, discernment, and faith is what makes her power so profound and her impact so lasting. The journey of a woman who refuses to give up also requires resilience. She will face setbacks, misunderstandings, and moments of despair. Yet her focus remains on God's promises rather than her current circumstances. She develops a rhythm of seeking God's guidance daily, reinforcing her faith with prayer, meditation on scripture, and worship. Her strength comes from her recognition that she cannot rely solely on her own understanding or endurance, but must lean on the one who called her. The more she aligns her actions with God's instructions, the more she experiences his provision, peace, and empowerment in ways that transcend human logic. Persistence in God's assignment also involves embracing patience. A woman who refuses to give up understands that timing is as important as effort. She recognizes that forcing outcomes or attempting to control situations can undermine God's purpose. Instead, she cultivates patience, trusting that God's plans unfold according to his perfect schedule. This patience is not passive waiting. It is active engagement, continuous effort, and steadfast prayer. It is the willingness to continue loving, praying, and serving even when the results are not immediately visible. Patience and persistence together create a spiritual posture that invites God's power to work mightily, often exceeding what the woman herself could imagine. Faithful endurance also deepens intimacy with God. When a woman continues in obedience despite trials, she learns to rely not on her own strength, but on his. She experiences his faithfulness firsthand, sees his timing unfold, and witnesses his hand move in ways that strengthen her trust. Each act of perseverance reinforces the truth that God is faithful, that his plans are perfect, and that his power is sufficient to carry her through any challenge. The journey of refusing to give up transforms her faith from a concept to a lived reality, making her a beacon of hope for others who are struggling to remain steadfast in their own lives. Furthermore, refusing to give up opens the door to supernatural intervention. There are situations where human effort alone would not suffice, where breakthrough can only come from God's direct involvement. A woman who stays in obedience positions herself to receive divine intervention, guidance, and support that would not be available if she abandoned her post. Her steadfastness aligns her with God's power in ways that produce results far beyond what she could achieve independently. This alignment between her persistence and God's purpose is where miracles, restoration, and transformation occur. Finally, the decision to remain steadfast cultivates a legacy of faith. A woman who refuses to give up sets an example for younger generations, for peers, and for all who observe her journey. Her obedience demonstrates that faith is not just belief but action, that true strength is revealed in perseverance, and that trust in God produces fruit that lasts. Her story becomes a testimony of God's faithfulness, a narrative that inspires courage, hope, and trust in others. By choosing to stay, she becomes part of a larger tapestry of God's plan, contributing to a legacy of faithfulness that continues long after her own struggles are over. A woman who refuses to give up understands that her perseverance is not just about the immediate situation, it is about aligning with God's eternal purposes. She knows that every act of faithfulness, Every moment of endurance, every refusal to walk away is part of a greater story that God is writing. She embraces the struggle as part of her spiritual journey, recognizes the growth that comes through persistence, and trusts that God's plan is unfolding perfectly, even when the outcome is not yet visible. There is a unique kind of revelation that comes when a woman begins to understand that what feels like delay is not denial, and what feels like waiting is not wasted time. Many women struggle with the tension of seasons where nothing seems to move, where prayers seem unanswered, and where circumstances refuse to align with their desires. In those moments, doubt can creep in. Fear can whisper, and impatience can tempt them to act outside of God's timing. Yet, it is precisely in these moments that God is at work behind the scenes, orchestrating events, preparing hearts, and positioning people in ways that only He can orchestrate. Understanding that delay is often development requires a shift in perspective, a willingness to trust God's unseen hand, and a commitment to remain faithful even when the evidence in front of you suggests otherwise. Waiting is not passive, it is active preparation. Every moment of perceived delay is an opportunity for growth, refinement, and spiritual deepening. A woman who recognizes this begins to see her circumstances differently. She understands that the pause is not punishment, but a necessary part of her journey. God uses the waiting season to cultivate patience, to strengthen her faith, and to shape her character. It is during these times that she learns to rely less on her own understanding and more on God's guidance. She discovers that the work being done within her is just as important as the work being done around her, and that spiritual growth cannot be rushed. Many women fail to recognize the purpose behind the delay because they measure success according to the world's timeline. Society tells them that progress must be visible, that results must be immediate, and that waiting is equivalent to failure. But God operates on His own timetable. His purposes are not constrained by human schedules, and His plans often require preparation that cannot be expedited. What may seem like stagnation is often a season of strategic alignment where God is setting the stage for a breakthrough that will surpass expectations. Every delay carries with it a lesson, a revelation, and an opportunity to grow closer to God. In the midst of delay, a woman must learn to remain steadfast. She must cultivate the ability to trust God even when the situation appears hopeless. This trust is not blind. It is informed by her knowledge of God's faithfulness in the past, His promises in Scripture, and the inner witness of the Holy Spirit. She recognizes that impatience can lead to premature decisions that derail destiny, and she chooses instead to remain faithful, consistent, and obedient. The act of waiting, while challenging, becomes a spiritual discipline that strengthens her resolve and deepens her intimacy with God. Delay also provides the opportunity for discernment. When things move too quickly, there is a risk of rushing into situations, decisions, or relationships that are not aligned with God's will. By contrast, a season of waiting allows time for reflection, prayer, and confirmation. It provides space to evaluate motives, examine intentions, and seek clarity. A woman who embraces this perspective understands that God's delay is often His protection, His preparation, and His perfect timing converging to ensure that the eventual outcome will be both fruitful and fulfilling. Spiritual maturity is often forged in the fires of waiting. A woman learns resilience when she continues to pursue her purpose despite the absence of immediate results. She develops patience as she waits for God's timing rather than forcing outcomes. She strengthens her faith by trusting in promises that have not yet been fulfilled. Each challenge, setback, or period of uncertainty is a training ground, shaping her into someone capable of stewarding the blessing, responsibility, or relationship that God is preparing to bring into her life. In essence, the waiting period is as much about who she becomes as it is about what she will receive. Faithful waiting also cultivates humility. A woman who understands that the timing belongs to God learns to surrender control. She releases the need to manipulate circumstances or pressure outcomes, recognizing that God's wisdom far exceeds her own. This humility allows her to remain teachable, adaptable, and open to God's direction. She learns to value process over speed, preparation over immediacy, and divine alignment over personal preference. In doing so, she positions herself to receive the fullness of what God has intended, rather than a partial or rushed version that could fall short of His plan. It is also important to recognize that waiting is rarely comfortable. It often requires enduring uncertainty, resisting doubt, and maintaining hope in the face of disappointment. The enemy will exploit moments of waiting to provoke fear, frustration, or despair. He will attempt to convince her that God has forgotten, that her prayers are unheard, and that her persistence is in vain. Yet, the woman who understands the purpose of delay resists these lies. She clings to the truth that God is never late, that his promises are sure, and that his timing is always perfect. She refuses to allow temporary appearances to dictate her faith, choosing instead to focus on the eternal outcome that God is orchestrating. Delay also teaches the value of preparation. God often uses waiting periods to equip his children with the skills, knowledge, and insight necessary for what lies ahead. This preparation may involve strengthening character, developing discernment, building relationships, or providing opportunities for learning. Each moment of patience contributes to readiness, ensuring that when the appointed time arrives, she is fully equipped to handle the responsibility, blessing, or challenge that God places before her. The waiting season is a divine classroom where lessons are taught, character is formed, and faith is reinforced. Furthermore, recognizing that delay is development encourages gratitude. Even in seasons of waiting, a woman can cultivate thankfulness for the growth, insight, and transformation occurring within her. She begins to see that every challenge, every trial, and every moment of uncertainty carries hidden blessings. Gratitude shifts her perspective from focusing on what has not yet arrived to appreciating the progress already made. It fosters joy in the journey, resilience in the process, and hope for the future. By embracing gratitude, she strengthens her faith, maintains her focus, and positions herself to fully receive the fulfillment of God's promises. Waiting also deepens dependence on God. A woman who understands that what appears as delay is actually preparation learns to rely not on her own understanding, efforts, or timing, but on God's sovereignty. She prays with greater intentionality, seeks guidance with discernment, and submits her desires to his will with trust. This dependence cultivates intimacy with God, allowing her to experience his presence, provision, and power in ways that would not be possible if she relied solely on her own abilities. In this way, the waiting period becomes a season of spiritual enrichment, building a foundation that will support the blessings yet to come. The process of recognizing delay as development also requires perseverance. A woman must resist the temptation to abandon her purpose prematurely, to settle for less than God's best, or to take shortcuts that compromise his plan. Perseverance involves maintaining faith, consistency, and commitment even when the path seems unclear. It requires courage to continue forward in the face of uncertainty, resilience to withstand discouragement, and trust to believe that God is orchestrating every detail. Through perseverance, she aligns herself with the outcome God has prepared, ensuring that her eventual breakthrough will reflect his glory rather than human impatience. In addition, understanding delay as development reinforces hope. Even when circumstances appear stagnant, the woman who trusts God knows that the waiting is temporary, the preparation is purposeful, and the fulfillment is coming. Hope sustains her through moments of frustration, energizes her when discouragement threatens to take hold, and strengthens her resolve to remain faithful. It transforms waiting from a period of frustration into a season of anticipation, where she actively positions herself for what God has already promised. Every season of waiting carries a lesson about timing, faith, and trust. It teaches that God's plan cannot be rushed, that his promises are worth the patience required, and that his timing is perfect even when it challenges human expectations. The woman who embraces this truth becomes a living example of steadfastness, a beacon of hope and a testimony of divine faithfulness. She demonstrates that persistence, patience, and trust are not just virtues to be admired, but powerful tools that align her with God's purpose and position her to receive his blessings fully. When a woman internalizes this truth, she stops viewing delay as an obstacle and begins to see it as an essential part of her journey. She realizes that the waiting period is not wasted time, but sacred space where God is working, shaping, and preparing her for the fullness of what he has promised. She learns that every trial, every moment of uncertainty, and every unanswered question contributes to her growth, equips her for her purpose, and strengthens her faith. By embracing this perspective, she transforms waiting from a season of frustration into a season of opportunity, preparation, and divine alignment.